Hey guys, Caleb here with DSLR Video Shooter, and we are going to be talking about the Pocket 4K versus the Pocket 6K, which you should buy and why, because these cameras are similar yet quite different, and I think there's been a lot of confusion, and I've learned a lot about the differences having purchased each. Now, before we jump in, I want to thank today's sponsor, which is myself. I finally finished the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and 6K guide update. So, if you want to learn about these cameras and how to capture the best footage out of them, definitely check out my guide over at academy.dslrvideoshooter. And hey, if you're not into Blackmagic, there's tons of other guides over there. I've updated the guides with all the new camera updates and a ton of information specific to the 6K since that guide was released. So with that out of the way, let's jump in and talk about the differences and a couple pointers that'll hopefully help you figure out which one of these cameras is best for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is resolution. Obviously, the 6K has higher resolution than the 4K, but it comes at a cost. You cannot shoot raw 4K on this camera. It's just not possible. So right out of the gate, if you know you want that higher 6K resolution when shooting raw, this is going to be a great camera, and it really is incredible to have that much horsepower when it comes to raw video in such a high resolution. And at the end of the day, the real story with the Pocket 6K is 6K. So if you don't need that 6K or don't want it, and the file sizes that come along with that, the 4K is a phenomenal way to go. The next one might surprise a couple of people, and that is if you're going to be shooting in ProRes a lot, I would recommend going with the Pocket 6K. When you switch from RAW to ProRes, you're actually going to lose all those higher resolutions, which bummed a ton of people out, me included. But the real sneaky thing is you can still use the entire sensor of this camera, and it's going to downsample that to 4K. So when you're shooting ProRes on the Pocket 6K, you're actually able to tell it, hey, use the entire sensor, the Super 35mm 6K sensor, and then capture at 4K. And this is going to do several things for you. First, it's going to give you the full width of the sensor when it comes to the capture, so the widest possible shot and the least amount of crop. Secondly, your 4K footage on this camera is going to look so much better than the Pocket 4K because, again, we're using a 6K sensor, downscaling that into 4K. So if you compare ProRes 4K on the 6K against ProRes 4K on the Pocket 4K, you're going to notice a detailed difference. So the Pocket 6K, even though it can't record RAW in HD or ProRes at 6K, is still a phenomenal way to go if you're going to be shooting a lot of ProRes. Another important factor to consider when choosing between these two cameras is the field of view and the crop. Now, without any kind of modifications, the 6K has a crop of a little over 1.5 times, which is pretty normal for a Super 35mm sensor. The Pocket 4K has a Micro Four Thirds sensor, and it's going to have a crop of just under 2 times. So it's definitely a heavier crop than the 6K. And this is what that looks like when we compare the 6K without any modifications to the 4K without any modifications. So if you're not going to do anything but put lenses directly on these cameras, the 6K is going to give you a wider field of view. But of course, there's a wonderful thing called speed boosters or focal reducers, which dramatically change this effect on the Pocket 4K. So when it comes to speed booster options, there are kind of two strengths for this camera: a reduction of 0.71 and a reduction of 0.64. And for those who don't know what speed boosters are, they reduce the crop factor of your camera. That's the kind of super short version of that explanation. So right now, if I turn the camera over here, you'll notice we have an adapter here that adapts Canon to EF, and this is the XL model. So it's going to reduce the crop by 0.64 times, which is the most you can reduce currently on this camera. It's one of the more expensive speed boosters or focal reducers, but if you want to spend a little less, you can get the 0.71, which is also available from Metabones, and then there are a gazillion other ones available from Viltrox and other companies for very, very little money if you're looking to reduce your crop. So what happens to our crop factor when we add a speed booster? Well, if you're using the XL model, which I have here, your crop factor will go from 1.9 down to 1.2 and change, which is a dramatic shift, making it significantly wider of a field of view than the Pocket 6K. The other adapter, if you go with the 0.71 style speed booster, you're looking at a little over 1.3 times, which is still significantly wider than the 6K. So field of view, when you add adapters into the game, makes the Pocket 4K a better buy because you're able to get much wider shots and take more advantage of the glass you're using, and you're also going to get better low light and other things like that. Now, there are potential speed booster options coming out for the 6K, and that'll change this whole equation, but still, budget-wise, you're going to get way wider shots when you go with a Pocket 4K and a speed booster. Another factor to consider is going to be battery life. The 4K completely spanks the 6K when it comes to the power it uses. It really doesn't use nearly as much. This camera, however, the 6K, burns through LPE6 batteries like crazy. So you're going to need a third-party solution for power for this camera, whereas the Pocket 4K, it's definitely more usable with the built-in battery. Another thing to consider is going to be the noise, and not this kind of noise, but this kind of noise. The Pocket 6K has much louder fans and kind of larger vents here, so when it comes to sound, you're going to have some noise there, potentially, depending on your microphone setup. Next up is going to be the color differences with these cameras. They use different sensors, so they're going to react slightly differently when it comes to color. I have found the Pocket 6K to be better than the Pocket 4K. It just seems to play nicer when it comes to skin tones and kind of that red region of the camera's color. I also found that white balance just seems to be more accurate on this camera. So if you've been struggling with the Pocket 4K, which I know a lot of people have, the Pocket 6K is just a little easier to work with. Another factor to consider is the lens mounts available on these cameras. We have an EF mount on the Pocket 6K, Micro Four Thirds on the Pocket 4K. So if you like the EF mount, the 6K is a great option to go with. Nothing needed, you just put Canon lenses on it. But on the 4K, I appreciate the lens compatibility. So you're gonna have way more options when it comes to lenses, adapting Canon FD, M39, and a whole host of other stuff that you just can't use with the Pocket 6K. So if you like adapting lenses, the 4K is a better buy because you can do that. And of course, there's also speed booster use, which there's nothing really out right now for the 6K. Something I know people are going to ask me is the differences when it comes to low light performance on these cameras. Honestly, from what I've found working with these, they're very close. They're both really, really good when it comes to being able to shoot raw and have a lot of flexibility in the low light department. They both have dual native ISO capabilities, and of course between the two, if you have to pick, the 6K is going to be better when it comes to low light. However, when you start throwing in speed boosters on the Pocket 4K, that completely changes the arrangement and the stats, because now we have speed boosters and we're gaining light hitting the sensor, which helps a lot with low light. So it's kind of a wash in my opinion. And of course, one of the biggest factors between these two is going to be the price. The 6K is $2,500 as of the making of this video, and the Pocket 4K sits at $1,300. But what's interesting is even if you buy the most expensive best speed booster, the XL model from Metabones, you're still under $2,000 for a Pocket 4K, which makes it just a wonderful buy. So hopefully this video has helped you figure out which one of these cameras you should be going with. At the end of the day, the 6K camera is all about 6K, those higher resolutions, and it also does really good when it comes to shooting 4K ProRes, since you have that added detail. The color is slightly better and it's a wonderful camera. The 4K is just an insane value for the money. It's a little softer when it comes to detail compared to the 6K, but you have a ton of lens options. It's quieter, it's better when it comes to its battery life, and the color might be a little off compared to the 6K, but there's almost no way to go wrong with a camera that sits at $1,300, and the options when it comes to lenses are awesome. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to support the channel, check out my guides over at academy.dslrvideoshooter. We've got the new update for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera video guide, and you can also check out the cameras via the links in the description if you want to learn more. I also have some other stuff with the speed boosters and various other things we mentioned. That's going to do it for me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.